Right now, nearly 2 billion people have little to no access to the gospel. These are frontier people groups. Our goal is to see God glorified through an abundance of Christ followers in every people group. This is Joshua Project. Welcome to the Joshua Project podcast. I'm your host, Dylan, and today we're interviewing Rotimi Akinpelu. Rotimi is serving as the Director of People Group Adoption at Joshua Project. Rotimi, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's such a great pleasure to be with you.
So, Rotimi, you're serving in Nigeria, one of the most vibrant mission-sending nations on the continent. How did you end up at Joshua Project, working specifically on a program that connects churches to frontier people groups?
All right, thank you for your question. And I must say that it's such a great pleasure to be here once again. My name is Rotimi. I work with Joshua Project, but before I joined Joshua Project, I've been serving as a full-time missionary for some 14 years. And that has taken me around every single state and capital in Nigeria with extension of work across some African countries. So at some point in my journey, serving as a full-time missionary, I got plateaued. I knew that I wanted more than my usuals. And the things I've done that brought me excitement were not as exciting again, as it were, because they were not taking me out of my usuals. So I was looking for more. I was seeking for greater relevance in what God is doing among nations. And a friend in the US, Professor J.D. Payne, shared that Joshua Project was hiring. And that was it for me because my whole heart resonated. And so I got through the process of joining staff, which was very rigorous, but my heart wanted it because I knew that something must take me out of my usuals and position me for greater relevance in fulfilling global missions. And so that's how I found myself in Joshua Project, and graciously the team onboarded me.
And how long have you been serving with Joshua Project?
A little over a year.
So, before we get into the program itself, will you set the scene for our listeners? Whenever we talk about frontier people groups, what exactly are we talking about? Who are these people, and why do they represent such a distinct challenge for the global church?
Okay, frontier people groups are those among whom we have less than 0.1% Christian presence. Now, that may be too mathematical. Another way to explain it is that when you check 1,000 persons among this people group, you will hardly find one Christian among them. And they represent a major challenge because before now, the global church has been going for low hanging fruits. You know, when you are under a mango tree, you are tempted to go for just the one that is closest to you, which are the general and rich people groups. But frontier people groups are those fruits up top of the tree, which are not easily accessed. And for you to get there, you have to climb a ladder or climb the shoulder of your friend, to get there. And they are important because they constitute over 70% of the global and rich people groups, which means that any work among frontier people groups is more catalytic to accelerate the finishing of the task of world evangelization. So you can define them as a people group that when you count 1,000 or even more among a specific people group, you hardly find even just one. And we need to take it as a challenge because I will give you an example of Africa. Frontier people groups in Africa boast that if you go among them to make your findings, you will not find any believer, not even a single believing family. And we want to change that to reality because for everyone Christ died, and the precious blood that has been shed must be appropriated, converting them from kingdom of darkness to light.
So, there are roughly 3,200 frontier people groups in the world, and that's about 2 billion people that have little to no access to the gospel.
Mhm.
Rotimi, when you hear that number, what does it make you feel?
Sincerely, That number is challenging because we need to finish the task of evangelizing every people group, that is, from among every family, according to the mandate given to Abraham, which Christ re-echoed to us. Every soul must be saved from among every family upon the earth. And to see that we have nearly 2 billion FPGs, frontier people groups, to be saved, is a challenge to the global church. Why? We are well more than able to undertake the task and to finish it. So we only have to look inside and be ready to take responsibility for the Great Commission as laid upon us by the Lord. So it is huge, but not insurmountable for the global church, considering the amount of grace that we have received, which is to the end of deploying it to evangelize the nations.
Yeah. So what I hear you saying is that this need is the church's responsibility. And it's part of this great commission that Christ has given to his church. And part of answering that need and one of the initiatives that Joshua Project is really focusing on this year is people group adoption. So Rotimi, what is people group adoption at its core? And if someone is hearing about this for the first time, what is the program actually asking a church to do?
All right. Reaching FPGs is not part of the Great Commission. It is the core, CORE, of the Great Commission, you know? And we have to see it as the core of the Great Commission because if you look at what Paul said, he said, I would rather walk where Christ's name has not been mentioned than to go to work where Christ's name is already mentioned so that I don't build on another man's work. You realize that. So the core of the Great Commission actually is to go to work where the people have not got their own first chance to hearing the gospel or responding to the gospel. That is the target of the Great Commission. That is the drive of the Great Commission. So when we conquer the territory, the demand of God upon us is to go to another territory. And Frontier People Group, they are needing cross-cultural workers because from among them, they don't have indigenous movement for church planting. So to do any work among Frontier People Groups, there's need for cross-cultural worker. And perhaps we may get there in our discussion because every people, they are first a receiving people of missionaries before they will come of age and also become sending. Do you realize that? So, frontier people groups are those that are needing cross cultural missionaries, those that will come among them to evangelize them, raise them in the faith, and make them formidable, even becoming a mission force. So, I needed to reiterate that they are not just part of the Great Commission, they are a core of the Great Commission. And what about people group adoption? Or, as we like to put it in Joshua Project, frontier people groups adoption. People group adoption is a strategic partnership between believers, churches, mission organizations, and networks, working together to accelerate gospel breakthrough and indigenous church planting movement among frontier people groups. The reason why we call it strategic partnership is because the global church and mission movement is talking about collaboration, but as it were, it has not been activated. So people group adoption is that ignition point where collaborative partnership is indeed activated. And you realize that those from the home front are working with those on the frontiers, that is, the field missionaries. And so there's that collaboration where the home front is interconnected with the work that is happening in the frontiers. That is what people group adoption seek to establish. Strategic partnership between believers, local churches, mission organizations, and network collaboratively working together to ensure that there's gospel penetration, evangelization, indigenous church planting, catalyzing movements, self-propagating movement among frontier people groups.
So, how does a local church on the home front use this people group adoption process to make an impact among frontier people groups? What does it look like?
We are encouraging believers across local churches to come visit the Joshua Project website. For us, our strength in Joshua Project is that we have profiled people group, especially frontier people groups, in every country, continent across the globe. So the local churches, believers in local churches can come on Joshua Project website, choose a people group that God is giving them vision to target, to engage. So when they come on our website and click on a people group for adoption, they are sure to receive prayer updates and the reality of things among these people groups. So in Joshua Project website, you get to know about a people group from the comfort of your home. Everything you need to know about them. Why? Because for you who wants to become an adopting partner, to adopt this people group, it is important that you know about them. Then we'll give you updates, even from the field. And what you stand to gain is that we'll connect you with a field missionary who is right there working on that field, and the agencies facilitating gospel breakthrough among frontier people groups. So if a believer, a family, or a local church adopt frontier people groups, they get details about the people group, they get live prayer update about them, and they get to track the progress of gospel movement among these people group, including those that are indigenous believers and disciples being made and who are multiplying.
So, I'll just say this is something that my church has done and has been a part of, and it has richly blessed not just the people that we serve among, but also the church itself. And for us, our church began working among frontier people groups 30 years ago before I was even born. And there's just this kind of idea in some churches of adopting a frontier people group looks like maybe having a banner or a plaque on the wall with their name and then having some kind of prayer night once a month or something like that for this people group. And for my church specifically, that wasn't enough. For my church, what adoption meant was basically coming before God and making a commitment to adopt this people group as your responsibility, saying there are no Christians among this people group. Um, there's no current work going on among this people group. We, as a local church, are going to make the commitment to be the ones responsible to consistently uphold this group in prayer before the Lord and to do whatever it takes to see these people reached. And it may not look like this for your church, but for my church, it meant sending missionaries to that people group. It started out as connecting with IMB missionaries who are already on the field, but it grew to the point where we as a church were actually able to raise up and send our own missionaries through just church based sending and move this people group from unengaged and unreached to having a sustained gospel presence today where the work being carried on is actually being carried on by indigenous workers from that people group, reaching their own people group and also people groups around them. And so this just works. This is God's way of reaching the unreached, not just through a disconnected missions organization and certain church members who feel called to missions, but really bringing the local church together with the missionaries on the field, bridging the gap. Um, and Joshua Project has come up with a specific acrostic to help you and your church get from just a kind of awareness and understanding of unreached people groups to actual steps you can take to seeing these groups reached. So, Rotimi, walk us through the adopt acrostic.
All right, thank you for that question. Just like you said, in your own local church, they get to put the profile of the people group, including pictures from among them, on the wall. That's critical because when we talk about the adopt acrostic, we're talking about the ADOPT acrostic, which underscore the framework for adoption. A stands for awaken. Frontier people groups can be seen as hidden people group, those that are not known to the global church, those that an average believer has little or no knowledge about. From the example of a low hanging fruit that I mentioned, frontier people groups are those that are on top of the tree. So it is away from the eye of an average believer. So awaken involves a picture from among them, a profile of this people group being put in front of the global church. And when I mean the global church, including an average believer and Christian families. So that pattern actually works when you put the picture and the profile of a frontier people group on the church wall in a way that those who come to worship cannot ignore it. So we are calling their attention to a people group who are yet sitting in darkness. And we encourage Christian families to do so. Put the picture and the profile of your adopted frontier people group on the wall in your room, such that you are reminded to keep them in prayer. And that is awakening to the reality of these people. Awaken to a people for whom Christ also has died, and the harvest among them is waiting for us to engage with. So the first acrostic letter is A, which is awaken. Know about them. Know that they are of the highest priority for engagement. Then the D is decide. On which frontier people group God is giving you the responsibility to adopt in the place of prayer, in the place of collaborative partnership, which may include giving to indigenous workers and cross-cultural missionaries for church planting movements. So you have to decide. When you decide for a people group, the people group are no longer unknown. Now they have a family and a local church or a group of believers praying for them. And that goes a long way. After decide, we have orient. That is, learn about the reality of these people groups, learn the things that are contextual to them. Why? We need such information in terms of orientation to become proper adopting partner for these frontier people groups. And orient include getting reports from missionaries on the field to get to know about the updates of this people group, the extent to which they are responding to the gospel or still resisting, which also reinforces our prayer. So we have awaken, we have decide, we have orient, and the P stands for praying. Prayer is the engine that accelerates gospel movements among those yet to be reconciled to Christ. So we need to pray, and it cannot be overemphasized. I got a quote, which is part of the quote that brought me into full-time missions. A brother said, in no other way can the believer be as fully involved with God's work, especially the work of word evangelization, as in intercessory prayers. I should say that again. In no other way can the believer be as fully involved with God's work, especially the work of word evangelization, as in intercessory prayer. So prayer is not one of those things. Prayer constitutes the bulk of the work in reaching FPGs. So when we pray, we need to follow it up with action, which is teaming up. Over the decades, we have been engaging with unreached people groups since Christ left the work for us to continue with. The undoing of the global church and mission movement regarding accelerating the fulfillment of the Great Commission is that there has been less of collaboration and partnership. But in this kingdom, there's no room for isolation. You know, for us to work and be formidable, we have to foster collaboration. So, with the adopt acrostic, we are encouraging collaborative partnership among gospel workers, among agencies, even among networks, encouraging believers and local churches to be involved with agencies and networks to accelerate gospel breakthrough among those waiting to be harvested into the kingdom of light. So the T there underscores team up and take action. Don't take action without finding someone to join hands with, to join forces with. Don't take action as an individual. Don't take action as a family. Don't take action as a local church. Actually, take action. The action to take is to team up, you know, build collaboration, because that way the work is accelerated.
And it really is a simple layout for churches to follow, especially if you're new to missions. Like many churches I've spoken with, you've heard about missions, you know that there's people out there who haven't heard the gospel, but you just don't quite know what steps to take. And really, all this process is just giving you concrete steps on how you can personally be involved in reaching a frontier people group. And it's really that simple. It's awakening to the need, deciding on a people group to adopt, orienting yourself and your church to that people group, praying for them consistently, teaming up and taking action, figuring out what are the next steps. And I want to focus just a little bit on the P of adopt, on prayer, because it really is so important and it is so often overlooked. Um, E.M. Bounds is well known as having some of the best works written on prayer. And in one of his books on prayer, he says that prayer and missions, they have to go together, that missions relies heavily on prayer, and prayer is the handmaiden of missions. And so in order for missionaries on the field working among frontier people groups to succeed in their work, to see breakthrough, to see hearts transformed and people giving their lives to Christ, there has to be a praying church behind them who is praying specifically for their needs. And so often we hear of people asking for more funds, more financial needs for missions, and these things are important, but we have got to focus on prayer. Like Rotimi said, prayer is the engine that moves the global mission. I really, really cannot emphasize enough the importance of intercession, the importance of having a local church behind these missionaries that is constantly holding them up in prayer. Um, Now, Rotimi, you have talked specifically about this burden that you have for African churches engaging in frontier missions. And so often in our Western context, we have this idea of like it's the Western American church reaching frontier people groups somewhere else. But what we don't realize is that Africa really is becoming the mission sending force. So tell me, why African churches specifically, and why now?
Okay, Africa can no longer outsource the evangelization of our own people to Western missionaries. You know, Africa can no longer look outside, waiting for others to come and complete the task of evangelizing our own people. You know, like I mentioned, a people are first a receiving people, but they must come of age and become sending people. So Africa has come of age to becoming a sending national continental movement. First to finish the task within our own location and continent, then also to send out cross cultural missionaries to the ends of the earth. And I think that that is the season we are in right now because African believers possess the spirituality, the resilience, the cultural proximity, the calling to carry out the fulfillment of the gospel mandates across our villages, cities, borders, and people groups. We we are built for the difficult terrains. Why? Because this is home for us. And that's why we created the People Group Adoption Manual for the African Church and Mission movement so that the giant within the African church can be awoken to rise to the responsibility of the unfinished task among frontier people groups within our own continent. So realize that we have transitioned from becoming a receiving continent to becoming even a sending continent. So you have missionaries of African descent in other countries and continents of the world, and they are doing so exceptionally well in church planting movement, catalytic church planting movement.
Yeah, it is so amazing what God has been doing on the African continent and continues to do. So much so that in our people group adoption program, we have decided to create one manual for the global church and then a separate manual specifically for the African context because we see such a great opportunity to mobilize African churches to reach frontier people groups on their own continent and all over the world. So, Rotimi, what unique advantage does the African church have in this work? In language, culture, proximity, what does the African church bring to frontier missions that the Western church cannot replicate?
I wouldn't say that the relevance of the Western church is reducing. No, because the Western church is still heavier in giving for frontier missions than the African church. The Western church is still heavier in terms of developing resources than the African church. But the, the distinction of the African church is that we are able to understand the worldview of the FPGs within our continent than every other person. Now, there are American missionaries who are working in Nigeria and across Africa that I've met, and they have thoroughly humbled me because they speak our own language, indigenous languages, even more than me. But again, they cannot become Africans. Some have even renounced their nationalities to stay in Africa and die here. We have buried a lot of them here. But the work is still depending of children of the soil to finish the task. So that is the second generation missionaries across Africa to finish that task. So much as there is input from the Western world, we need to rise to that task. And like SIM came to Africa to work, but they handed over the work to the locals, and they have continued it excellently well. So also are many other works which have been handed over, pioneered by the Western world, handed over to Africa to continue. So you see, for the finishing of the task, for the conclusion of the work, it takes Africans to finish it within our own continent.
What obstacles do you run into when you approach other African churches about adopting frontier people groups? Is there any resistance?
Sincerely, these are my own people, so I have to be careful. I think the major challenge that is hindering the African church to come to full potential and capacity in frontier mission operations is that we need to die to self. There's something that the Western missionaries have which we are yet to come into as a people in the African continent. The Western missionaries are selfless. But for us to do any work, we like to put our name tag on it. We like to attach ourselves to the work. Like I said, Western missionaries came, pioneered work, heavy work, and handed it over. Those work have been completely handed over without any Western influence. And those works are thriving right now. I'm talking about mega ministries, mega evangelical denominations and mission movements. So when the African church come to the place of selflessness, there will be an acceleration. We will come to full potential, full maturity, full capacity in advancing the gospel work. So what is the major challenge between us and the task that is unfinished, awaiting our engagement, is the removal of self, selflessness in giving, selflessness in going, selflessness in discharging sacred responsibility, not minding who gets the credits. That is a major challenge that needs to be off the table, off the road.
It's Christ's call to everyone to deny ourselves, to take up our crosses daily and follow him. And so I think your challenge is applicable to everyone, and that God is calling everyone, all Christians, to focus on and reach these frontier people groups. And the biggest thing that gets in the way is self. So, Rotimi, let's talk to someone who's listening right now. Maybe there's a pastor, someone who leads a small group, or even someone who's leading a missions team, and they're interested, but they don't really know where to start. What's the first step? How can they start this adoption process?
We have a Joshua Project website that receives over 2.5 million visitors annually. That's a huge traffic. So I'm saying to someone, maybe not in Africa, but any other part of the world, you want to join forces with other believers and local churches and agencies and networks, come on Joshua Project website. Because there's someone close to your neighborhood who has come on Joshua Project website and has adopted a people group that God has given you vision for that people group. So we are building a global mission ecosystem, interconnecting believers across the globe who have shared interests and vision for specific frontier people groups. And it's only on Joshua Project website you can find that opportunity where you will build and be connected to communities of believers. You are a pastor of a local church and you have interest to adopt a frontier people group. It will interest you that there's another pastor or another local church that God has given that same vision for the specific people group you have chosen. But we are the connecting points. Like we say in Joshua Project, our ministry is that of a midwife. We midwife collaborative partnerships. We midwife the coming together of those that God has given the burden for FPG to be connected with others that God has given the burden. Okay, a case in point, when Mary got pregnant with Christ, God needed to direct her to go meet Elizabeth, who is also pregnant. And when Mary knocked on the door to Elizabeth's house, there was a resonation, there was a bonding, there was a connection. So that's what we are doing. We are connecting, adopting partners across the globe. Why? Vision often dies off when you don't have a network of other persons bearing the same heavenly vision. So we give you access to other people who will sharpen your iron, together with whom you can exchange ideas and possibilities, and even form prayer group for the people group you have adopted. That is what the Joshua Project website affords. So we encourage individual believers, local churches to come on Joshua Project website, register your interest for the people group you are adopting, and we will give you prayer resources. We will give you updates from the field, and we will connect you with organizations and networks who are facilitating church planting among the same people groups. So you are never alone.
Right. So I'll share just a little bit of some of the process that I've seen my church go through. And over the years, the church I'm a part of has adopted four four frontier people groups. And I cannot name specifically who they are or where they are just for security reasons, but I had the privilege of serving as a missions intern with my church and going through this process of adopting our most recent frontier people group. And for us, it started as an awareness of knowing that there were still frontier people groups out there who needed the gospel, and feeling as a church a specific burden to reach Muslim people groups. Other people groups that we had adopted in the past were Buddhist or animist or Hindu, and we really felt a specific call to reach Muslim people groups. For us, this meant connecting with some of the people in our networks and looking through a Joshua Project list to see what some of the most unreached people groups were in the Muslim context. Um, because our church has had previous missions experience, it meant that during the decide phase, we actually went and sent kind of like scouting teams to these areas where the people groups were and simply prayed on these trips. Lord, are you calling us to adopt this people group? And this really is important. This really is serious because you're not making a light commitment here. This is a lifelong commitment to serve among this people group until they are reached and sending missionaries themselves. And so we came to a decision as a church to adopt this specific frontier people group. Uh, and it meant sending some of our church members to serve among this people group who are there today, and committing to send short term teams yearly or multiple times a year to go and pray among these people groups, to share the gospel, to work with partnering churches. Um, and this is all within year one. Now, that may not be what your year one looks like. This is totally case by case, depending on where the people group you choose to adopt is at. If there is a missions organization currently working among them, and if you've had any kind of missions experience in the past, it may look more like training in year one. So just understand that this isn't going to look the same for everyone, but the Joshua Project adoption process is very flexible. You go through this process, you decide what steps you want to take, you decide what responsibilities you want to take on, what you're able to do as a church or small group or even as a family, and then you make that commitment before the Lord. And like Rotimi said, we serve as the midwife, just coming alongside you and helping you make these decisions. And then when it's your time, we step out of the way and let you engage with this people group directly or connect you with missions organizations that are working with them directly. Then we step out of the way and let that partnership form. We've seen churches walk through this process, but I also know that there are some people listening, individuals listening, who think this sounds great. How can I get my church on board with this? Can a person like me, a young college student or just a young professional, participate in adoption on my own, or how can I get my church on board with this? And so, Rotimi, I just want to ask you, what would be your advice to someone who's listening who is interested but doesn't know how to bring this to their church? How can they introduce this to their pastors and help the rest of the church get on board with this?
All right. Thank you for that question. It's simple. First thing we must establish is that the adoption process, nobody can walk it alone. And just like you emphasized, at Joshua Project, we are here to journey with you. And in our journey with you, individual Christians and churches and agencies and networks, our journey is to ensure that we connect you with others who share the same burdens. And we have verified those who come on our website to register for adoption. So when we give you a contact, you can be sure that they are verified contacts. That is not to say that as an individual or a church, you won't do your due diligence, you know, as you collaborate to work together with these ones who are also ready to. But I will give you an example. Some believers in a local church, including a campus fellowship, were asking the question, what will it take to see a self-propagating church movement among FPG? Because a pastor here in Abuja, where I live, had preached challenging students, Christian professional students and families, you know, for to carry the burden for church planting movement among frontier people groups. So from that, they decided on Kanuri people because they are frontier people groups. In fact, in some contacts, the hardest to reach people groups in Africa. One of the hardest to reach people groups in Africa, they are in northeastern Nigeria, Niger Republic, Chad, and Cameroon. So a mission agency, they contacted a mission agency that organized monthly, that organized a frontier people group seminar, mission exposure for them, you know. Then they decided a month of praying and fasting for the Kanuri people they have adopted. So there was a prayer chain. The church leadership raised intercessors, they mobilized professionals and a, a campus fellowship. And while they pray, they decided to go on a short-term mission exposure among the Kanuri. The agency they contacted facilitated that exposure. So with that exposure, they got first-hand orientation about the Kanuri people. In fact, that exposure increased the burden in their hearts for the Kanuri people. It is no longer a hearsay, it is now what they have seen. They learned about their history, their identity, and their peculiarity. Even the techniques on how to do contextual evangelism among them. Then they decided, to relocate a missionary family and sponsor that family to go work among the. So the missionary family decided to learn Kanuri, while the 24-hour prayer chain, is still going on across families, including the campus fellowship that has been involved. So you can see a group of individuals, Christian professionals, with a student campus fellowship challenged by a local church, contacted a mission agency, formed prayer chain. They went on a mission exposure among the Kanuri in northeastern Nigeria, across the border into Chad and Cameroon. They pulled resources together and sponsored a missionary couple to go and live among them while they are also praying. The interesting thing is that from among the Christian professionals, there's a Kanuri who happened to be his colleague at work. And they got a Kanuri who is a business person, with whom they shared the Bible to. Now, the beauty of prayer is that it softens the hearts ahead of the planting of the seed of the gospel. So, this Kanuri friend to a Christian professional became an inroad to an indigenous church planting among the Kanuri, even though he himself hasn't, as it were, come to faith. Then the trader that was gotten, with whom they shared Bible, the family came to faith. So this effort has produced 5 house churches. That is, families who are now, who have embraced the gospel, though still very quiet and needing, effort in disciple making, contextual disciple making. Why? Because these are not literate people. These are people that they will prefer to hear the word of God in their own heart language. This effort also is leading to Bible translation, scripture engagement in Kanuri language. So the couple sponsored, they are into language learning, and they are looking for those that are few less than 0.1% believers among them, that they can bring to understanding the word of God in their heart language so that they can share with others. So the adopt acrostic helps to build a model, practical model and guide by which the church, a Christian family, even a campus fellowship can all work together, engaging with a mission agency to see that an indigenous church is planted among a frontier people group.
So, Rotimi, if every church that listened to this podcast adopted one frontier people group, what would change? Help us see the vision.
If every church adopts a frontier people group, in no time at all, what I didn't mention with the testimony I shared is that among the families that came to faith, some of them saw the visions of Christ, in their dream. So, what brings people to faith is the miracle that the Holy Ghost brings to bear when we pray. So, if a local church adopts a frontier people group, that local church will be praying for that frontier people groups. And let me say this very clearly. No matter the amount of cross-cultural missionaries we have deployed to work among frontier people groups, they cannot gather harvest of souls more than the prayer offered from the home front. So the prayers offered from the home front determine the level and the degree of harvest of souls that will be gathered by field workers in the frontiers. So you see, if a church adopts, which means during their service, they will raise prayer for the people they have adopted. The extent to which that prayer uproar will go, we can't know it until we cross Jordan into the other side of eternity. And I will give you a case in point. A friend of mine, working as a missionary among frontier people groups, was killed. And that death could have been averted if he had a home church praying for him. Another missionary working among a people group, frontier and hostile, was stuck and was preserved because there was a local church praying. An angel represented each of the persons in that prayer group to guide this missionary couple and averted what could have taken their life prematurely. So if a church adopts a frontier people groups, the prayer that we offer as a congregation, the weight of it goes a long way that it will take eternity to reveal. Then they can join force with a mission agency or network working among these people groups. And it will interest you that from that congregation, there will be those couples and individuals that will receive burden to go as a full-time missionary to serve among these people group, because there's no other place where we can get missionaries recruited outside our local churches. So churches adopting frontier people groups give room for those the Lord is calling to see the vision and to respond. And they will work collaboratively with an agency, with a network. They will give for those who are going to work among them and also support projects on the field, which can be access ministry, opening doors for the gospel into hearts and homes among frontier people groups.
Wow. Yeah, it is it is so cool to hear that story and just see the effects that prayer has on frontier missions, not only in the story of the church working among that frontier people group, but also the stories of how our prayers protect the missionaries and how our lack of prayer puts them at risk. Um, and so, if you're listening to this right now, please, please make it a priority to pray for frontier people groups to go, to send the Lord ahead of the missionaries and go and soften that soil of their hearts. But also, please pray for the missionaries working among them. They need your prayers, they need your support. And so, go onto the Joshua Project website and look at the list of the frontier people groups we've listed. We have another resource called Light the Nations Prayer Map, and you can find that at prayermap.joshuaproject.net. And when you go, you'll see the entire world lit up with all of these gray dots, and each of those dots represent a specific frontier people group. Now, when you click on one of those dots and you say that you have prayed for that group, it'll light up that group for 24 hours. And what that does is it shows symbolically the light that your prayers are bringing to that people group and the impact that you're making. So, Rotimi, thank you so much for coming on today. Thank you for sharing about the Frontier People Group adoption process. It's so good to hear from you and to see the impact that this work is making. Just before we leave, how can someone who's interested connect with you if they have any questions or connect with the team and find out how they can move forward?
We invite everyone, individual believers and local churches and mission agencies and mission networks, to come to Joshua Project website, and you can shoot me an email, rotimi@joshuaproject.net, you know. But even if you send an email to info@joshuaproject.net, we attend to all correspondence promptly. And it's our joy to serve the global church and mission movement.
Thanks again for listening to this episode. If you want to learn more about the adoption process, go to joshuaproject.net/adopt, download the adoption manual, and just look for God's next steps for you. Also, if you enjoyed this content and you want more like it, please go and subscribe, give us a rating, And if you would share this episode with a friend, with your pastor, with someone who you think could benefit from learning about people group adoption. I want to say thank you guys. God bless you, and I'll see you next time.